Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you for tuning in to GNG Link. It's no longer LinkedIn, but it's a live segment because we are live from LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. So depending on where you're tuning in from. So Gail and I are back. I'm back from a little bit of a personal leave. But today we have an interesting guest, Jen, who is a sales leader, sales expert, who is going to talk to us about culture add versus culture fit. So, like everybody knows, a lot of emphasis has been going around, and we're just talking about buzzwords. Culture has probably been one of the other buzzwords in the industry, about companies and how culture needs to be developed and so on. We constantly keep talking about when it comes to hiring culture fit, culture fit, culture fit. So today we're bringing a twist to the culture fit, and the segment is called culture add versus culture fit. And Jen is going to first talk about the difference between the two, culture add and culture fit. What is the difference between the two, and why is it important to hire based on culture add versus culture fit? So let's dive right in, because we only have 30 minutes, and I'm pretty sure the segment is gonna take up all the 30 minutes. So Jen, let's dive right in, and let's go straight into first. Let's differentiate the culture add versus culture fit. So what is the difference between the two?
Yeah, I mean, the culture fit is really making sure that they're focusing on finding a person that fits in with the team. You know, in some cases from Forbes, the tribal meaning is someone who works like us, who thinks like us, who looks like us, and is basically very much the same. And then the difference with culture add is when you're taking more of a global mindset, when you're considering the diversity of thought, rather what a person brings to the table, as opposed to, looking at it as what they've done, but what they've brought with them through their experiences, through their culture, through how they've learned, whether their career has been a jungle gym or just a ladder. All of those things that make us special and unique are part of what makes us, whether we're culture add or whether we're the same as everybody else within an organization, right? So for small to medium-sized businesses, as they're looking at their recruiting and, just bringing people on board, are they looking at people who are going to fit in, or people who are going to stand out and drive that innovation and change and be able to really bring new ideas to the table? And I know it's such a buzz to think outside the box, but to bring a new perspective that's based off their life experiences, whether that's cultural, whether it's, their age, their background, everything that makes them special. That's how I define it. I don't know if you guys have a different definition, but, as a leader, I look at people and what they bring with them. And I think that's an important thing for small to medium-sized businesses.
Gail, your thought?
I think that's really important. I think one of the problems is, whether you want to call it a buzzword or not, is that most people have heard the phrase over the last 15, 20 years, hire for culture fit. Yeah. That's what's been drilled into our heads for years. Mm-hmm. And the problem with that is, exactly as Jen said, is that you're not creating a diversity of thought, a diversity of people. So one, that impacts equity, impacts inclusion, impacts who makes it within the organization. But then there's also business impacts, that if everybody's thinking the same, if everybody's behaving the same, it's limiting your ability to change. It's limiting your ability to come up with innovation and come up with new ways of doing things. But the reality is we're right now sort of starting, I don't know if we're quite at the tipping point, but we're starting to get to the tipping point where more companies are recognizing the pitfalls of culture fit. Because culture fit, the problem also with culture fit is that there's a lot of companies that will talk about we hire for culture fit, but then don't actually make clear what culture means. They don't create clarity. They don't say culture means X, Y, and Z behaviors or X, Y, and Z values. They say just culture fit. Well, each person interpreting that individually just means, well, do I want to have a beer with this person? Do I want to have a drink with this person? Which I'm a non-drinker. I'm going to fail that 10 times out of 10. So I would never be hired. But that's the reality, that a lot of hiring managers have made culture fit to be, they make me feel comfortable. And which is obviously a major problem, because I've said many times, I've probably even said it on the show before, your gut lacks the data of who's going to be a good hire. And
well, hiring is always a gamble.
It's always going to be a gamble, but when you do it based on unconscious bias, you're not basing it on any quality data. You're not basing it on anything of relative to the job itself. All you're comparing it to is that you're making that person comfortable.
But you're right about the culture fit. Being in HR for 15 plus years, that's the beginning of your base. My career, anyways. That's how you do hiring, right? Fit. It's the fit, which is fine and worked decades ago. As we're moving and shifting, if anything, COVID should teach people is fast paced, right? How quickly you need to change. Now, if you had people on culture fit, how many of your culture fits can navigate change so quickly, right? Like, how many of those people were able to pivot right now? How many of those people were able to transform overnight and come up with innovation solutions to COVID in your organization, or pivoting to different solution services, products to be delivered because, well, let's face it, COVID happened, and so many companies, let's just take Canada, for example, since Gail and I are Canadians, who suffered the most for COVID right in the beginning was us, because we relied on export for everything, right? We don't make anything in-house. Everything comes from other countries. And now you're hit with something where, well, nothing can come in the country. So how many companies got really innovative? Ontario did. Thank God to Doug, who our premium, who went around and got all these companies to start making all these different products using their machines to make masks and all these things, right? Someone led that change overnight. Like, it was an instant thing that happened. So change that happened with COVID. If COVID's taught anyone anything, you need to hire people that can adapt to change quickly and be innovators, right? So that goes into right where we were talking about just before we went live was, well, culture ad, as you were explaining it, culture ad is also, well, if you want innovation and you want people to be innovative, then you need to hire for culture ad.
Jen, I have a question for you then. How have you seen this show up in your experience in the sales function? How have you seen then the pitfalls of this culture fit problem show up, and where does it, because somebody may not recognize it. A sales leader might not recognize that this is a problem, but what are some of the ways that it might manifest itself?
Yeah, I mean, I think especially in the tech industry, you see the sales bro culture where, it is about who you want to have a beer with, and there are kegs in the office. And that's how they wind down at the end of the day, talking about sports and having a beer. And so that environment that creates for the people who may be different is not necessarily, the most inclusive environment, right? So by having more people that are different, part of that equation is also thinking about how you create more inclusive environments so that when you bring on all these culture ads who are going to be so innovative and bring brand new ideas to the table, that you're creating a great space for them. Because with the culture fit and having everyone sort of be the same, you're not really allowing for that diversity, right? And everybody does care about diversity now. I mean, we're seeing that's probably the hottest role out there right now, is who is going to lead diversity at your organization. And so, when you just do fit, that's another part of the equation.
So then what are some Absolutely. I love it. And I'm curious then for you as a sales leader, how do you build that inclusion? Because one of the struggles that companies have had over the last 5, 10, 15 years is they will go on the diversity train, but have no interest in inclusion and then fail people miserably, put people in horrible situations. And I've heard a lot of people in the DEI space talk a lot about how we need to focus on inclusion first, because otherwise you're going to set people back. So I'm curious, from your experience, what are some of the things you've done to make sure that those outliers, those people who don't fit the bro culture, still fit your team?
You got to give them the psychological safety to really be able to be themselves. So that goes from everything from team meetings where you're giving everyone space to share their thoughts, their ideas, what they're bringing to the table, to how you celebrate wins in an inclusive way, to doing polls and really surveying your team to really understand how they want to do things and what they care about and what their career journey looks like. When you manage a person, you really need to manage the whole person, right? So that includes the environment, that includes their feelings, that includes everything about them. A doctor doesn't come in and look at the symptoms and not take in the whole person or the whole environment and say, okay, let's give you this. They take in the whole person. It's the same thing with leadership. You have to lead with your heart and take in the whole person and how you're going to inspire them and elevate them. And by doing that, you'll find out what they need. People will tell you what they need if you ask them and you create the space and the environment so that they can share.
That's brilliant. I mean, that's one of the things that's so key, is that psychological safety. I've been frustrated when I read on LinkedIn, people put in, they say, what you need to do is you need to ask your team questions. Yeah, that's absolutely true. But how you respond in that environment determines whether they're going to answer the questions again in the future. If you belittle them or dismiss them or don't do anything about their feedback, well, they're not going to continue to give you feedback. But that's why I love that you brought up that psychological safety, so that they know there's no risk to being honest with you.
Yeah. And as a leader, you have to be open. Whatever the feedback is, you're not going to like all the feedback. Sometimes you're going to say, yeah, I really didn't like that at all. That really bothered me. But are you open to that as a leader? Are you listening with an open heart, saying, okay, so this is how they feel. What can I do better? Or are you just saying, okay, you're wrong? If you're not going to lead with openness, then nobody's going to tell you anything. And you'll ask, are you okay? And they'll say, I'm fine. And we all know what I'm fine means.
So let's take a little bit of a step back. That's a great question. It is Gail's dad, by the way. I did look it up on LinkedIn. It's David. I actually do like the question, because it says, what's her definition of culture? But let's first actually define what is culture. I know we went right into what's the difference between culture add and culture fit, but maybe a lot of people don't even understand what is culture. So let's, Jen, when you think of culture, what's the definition that pops into your mind?
Yeah, the environment, the way it feels when you're onboarding, when you're an employee. It's all about the experience that you're having with an organization. So basically, that's it.
Gail?
So for me, culture is about the heart of the structure of the way, the behaviors that people have. There's culture, there's no monolith, there's no single culture in any organization that everybody behaves the exact same way. But the core of the behaviors come from the founder and come from the leaders. So it's those core behaviors that are common to everybody, that everybody knows when they're broken. The culture isn't necessarily what leaders put on the wall, but it is how people behave. That's the reality. It's the regular, the everyday behaviors of people broadly across the organization.
And just to sum it up, culture is how you treat your employees on a daily basis, and emotions and feelings that employees feel when they are at work is basically a summary of what culture is. And culture is something that should be always work in progress. It's not you define it once and that's it. This is our culture. This is how things going to be. Hence why I like the fact that you should be hiring for culture add, because you should be adding to your culture as you start to grow your organization. But the mix of people coming into your organization would also determine the culture you need to develop for your employees. Your people who are driving your profits in your organization is your people, and you need to build culture around your people. Hence where this topic is coming and driving hence where this topic is being driven to culture add is basically, if you continue hiring people for the fit, you're not being a progressive company. You're just set in your own ways. But if you start hiring people for culture add because your mindset is set to that you want to keep continue growing and want to be a progressive company, then you're going to have to hire people for culture add. They're going to keep adding to your culture, not sustaining your culture.
Also, one thing I always like to add here when talking about culture is a lot of people need to understand the difference between culture versus mood of an organization. Whereas the mood of many organizations over the last 5 months have obviously been a lot more tense than normal times. The culture is how is the mood being responded to. That's the reality, because the culture is going to remain, give or take, over time. It's going to evolve slightly over time, but it's going to remain, it's going to go through moods, depending on how well things are going, depending on how poorly things are going. But culture is really about is how do we respond to that mood? When people are stressed, do we then tell them, okay, now go out and make 20 more calls and that's going to make you feel better? Or when people are stressed, do we say, take the morning off, do some learning, take some time, and then you'll get back to calls when it makes sense for you? Those will determine then, like Gurpreet said, how do people feel? How do people ultimately feel? Was I treated like a human that, you know what, COVID's happening, I have to care about that? Or was I treated like a resource and I don't care about COVID, you still get that, get your number?
So let's move on to benefits of hiring employees or your people based on culture add, not the fit. Jen?
Yeah. The benefits is you're going to have a more diverse workforce. You're going to be able to pass that through the products you're creating, the services that you offer. You're servicing a global community. You're a part of the world, right? And the world has many different cultures. So as you grow and expand and innovate, you're bringing on more diversity, gives you more of a global mindset. So there is that. And you create, after you create the inclusion required for the culture add, you create a better work environment. You've got more enrichment and more ideas to bring to the table. And, it carries on through the team.
Gil, your perspective on
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you start to talk about the improvement to diversity, equity, and inclusion, there's really, there's two sides of the argument. There's the business side, and there's been studies done about diversity, having diverse opinions at the table. I don't like talking about the business side because I think there's the human side is just outweighs it significantly. Because by increasing your culture add, by opening yourself up, by recognizing the unconscious biases that have led to your hiring process historically, you're going to be creating an opportunity for more people to be a part of the group. And you're going to ensure, like Jen said, when you do this inclusion, that people feel better about working there. Because the reality is as an employer, you're creating a quality of life for your employees. And if you're always hiring people who all look and act the same, there's going to be a certain amount of comfort until you ask them to do something innovative, until you ask them to do something different. And the thing about culture add that I appreciate is that it's not saying hire somebody who's countercultural, because you still need to stand for something. It's just about
the values come in, right?
Exactly. That's where the values come in. So you stand for something. And as long as somebody is saying, hey, I can add to what you're looking for. You have these values. I can live those values and add to what your experience is, as opposed to saying, I make you feel comfortable. I look like you. I went to the same university that you did. And that's going to make you comfortable and make your life easy for a little while, because you know what? You think you know how to manage me because I'm the same as everybody else. And you don't have to change your ways, when the reality is employee experience is completely individual. And as a manager, you need to understand the uniqueness of each individual. And by hiring for culture fit, you're trying to limit everybody into this box that they're just not going to fit into.
Mm-hmm. And that goes right back to, 2020 has been a very interesting year. Biggest interesting year is it's a change. It's a year for change. We've seen it with COVID, then we've seen it with Black Lives Matter, George Floyd case. When that incident happened, we've seen so many companies putting out statements, and then so many companies also jumped the ship on hiring senior leaders. Well, one leader as a Black person. But wait, let's take a step back. This is where this topic also leads back to culture add, right? I like what, where is this comment? This is Daisy, by the way. I know someone linked in you on this comment's not showing up, but I checked who wrote this comment. So Daisy, I like this point. Culture ed also ties right back to inclusion and diversity, right? So when we had this big wave come in back in May or June, when George Floyd, I think it was June, end of May, beginning of June happened. And then everybody was talking, putting all these statements out. And then some people were so reactive to even hiring people, Black people, into roles, senior leadership, to make a point, to make a statement, which was great. But did anybody sit there and look at the culture and said, well, where do we need to change first? The culture, right? In the end of the day, your organization does stem from the values and your culture. But how many people actually looked at their culture and said, well, we need to make changes in our culture? And then you need to hire people, and hence why we're talking about culture add. Well, if you're not making changes in your culture, you're going to keep hiring the same type of people. You're not hiring diversity. You're hiring the fit, which is the culture fit. So there is a difference between culture add and culture fit, but let's just talk to the recent stuff that's happening in 2020. And biggest movement we had was with the Black Lives Matter. But curious to know how many companies actually took the time to look at their internal culture.
There were a lot of empty statements made.
Many.
Unfortunately, I read stories and spoke to people who previously worked at organizations who were as bad as any company when it came to these things, and then put out a statement as if they actually cared, as if they actually did anything, as if they didn't actually marginalize certain communities. But they're just as bad, but because it's 2020 and because it looks bad not putting a statement out, it's easy to put out a statement. But you're saying, do they look at their culture? Well, that's hard. That's the hard stuff, because then it requires introspection from leaders of, well, it's like this because of decisions we made. It comes back to our behaviors, our decisions. Mm-hmm. We have a culture that's not inclusive. We have a culture that may be actually outright racist because we've created that environment. And so it's really hard to look at that and to have that kind of introspection when you're the cause of the problem. You're the one who's created this problem.
But that's an interesting point, is where how many companies were so quick to write statements instead of looking inside and saying, well, wait, how are we the problem and how we can be the solution going forward, at least internally, right? It takes internal. You can't change anything on the outside. You have to change something from the inside. That's even as individuals. If we want change, we have to change inside first. Can't go changing outside because we live inside. And same thing with companies. You can't go putting statements out and just think everything is changing and just put a picture out there for the outside world to see, well, this is how we look. But when the inside might be totally a different reality, and with a lot of companies, and I know this because I work in HR, so many companies do not walk the talk.
No, it's true. I took this from I did a webinar yesterday with Fairy Godboss with a different perspective on this. And it was for the person who was job searching, finding a place that would make them feel good and make them, be happy to go to work and be able to thrive there. And what I suggested there is for the companies who say they believe in these things, their values, what are they? If they say they believe in them, are they actually living those values? Is it more than just the optics? Like Daisy, I think it was Daisy said, can you tell? Is it consistent throughout the executive team, looking at their social media, going to their Twitter, going wherever it is that they live? Can you tell what they actually believe in? When you look at the Glassdoor reviews, not taking those high scores at face value and looking for words like fear, not being inclusive, micromanagement, creating not great spaces. So from a job seeker perspective, the word is getting out there. So when employers, small and medium-sized businesses, are looking at themselves and the messages they're putting out there, if the values that they actually have don't align, people are going to start taking a closer look, because the day where that was okay is long past. It's not okay anymore. We see you. And so, we're in a very digital world. What used to be okay is just not going to be tolerated much longer. So you gotta get some diversity.
You make a great point. I mean, we live in an era of transparency that never existed previously.
Yeah.
The idea of being able to have insights into what employees are actually thinking within an organization was always completely opaque. And now in the era of social media, in the era of Reddit, Glassdoor, Fairy Godboss, all of these platforms where people have this anonymous opportunity to be honest. Yeah. Where they have this anonymous opportunity to say, yeah, they put out this great black square, but then this leader is still completely racist and they're okay with it, right? And these things come out, like Jen is saying, and I'm grateful they're coming out, because as there's a person who put a comment there, let's hold their feet to the fire. Let's make sure that this information gets out there. The reality is that companies thrive off of hiding this information, honest information. They benefit at your expense. They benefit at equity's expense, because it makes it comfortable for them to not have to hear these negative things. But the reality is the more we know about it, the more we can do something about it. It's like I was reading a post somewhere recently about how, not talking about pay is in the company's benefit, not yours.
Yeah, I talked about this yesterday as well. If someone says that they believe in transparency as part of what they believe in, that's their vision, their mission, And then when they say, so what salary are you looking for? If they're not willing to tell you what the range is when you ask rather than tell them, then you're not transparent. You're just not.
Yep. Yeah. And the person knows it quickly. The person will realize that very, very quickly, regardless of what you tell them. You can tell them you're transparent until the cows come home, but if you're not actually transparent, meaningless.
Nobody's going to believe you.
That's also a culture, right? Like not talking about salaries or not advertising salaries on job posting stems right back to culture, your values. If you, again, walk the talk, if you are claiming you're transparent, then be transparent when you're posting jobs. It's not a secret. I don't know why people think salary is a secret. Why is it a secret? We have salary guides that dictate what the market rates are. So how is it such a big secret? That I get it is a personal, when you're finalizing your composition with the company, yeah, there's other components to the base salary, the bonuses, and those are individually negotiated, right? Yeah, I get that part being personal, but the actual base salary should not be personal. It's you should be openly willing to advertise your salary and keeping it transparent, but you don't have to openly be transparent about who's getting paid what. Because individual is still an individual bringing unique value to the organization. You still have to compensate an individual. Job is separate from an individual. you have a salary band for a job, but then there's a different component of who you end up hiring. If you end up hiring a sharp caliber and their market rate is, say, the job posting posted was 90K, but this individual is worth 110K, you should be paying them 110K. So that is above what you budgeted. But can you advertise that to employees? So I do have a little bit of a different perspective on this just because I'm HR. Yeah, I don't think you should go advertising who's getting paid what per se. But as HR professionals, we should be constantly analyzing salaries and making sure people are getting paid properly, be it gender discrimination, because there's a huge gender gap in pay. But then again, it goes back to your culture. I see this all the time hiring. I was just on a call with a potential client yesterday. It's about the mindset. It is business, small, medium-sized companies have this biggest problem with mindset is they I don't know what world sometimes they live in, but try to bring them back to reality, start thinking strategic. It's very interesting to see how smart people lose their strategic ability when it comes to hiring. They go right back to, well, I'm looking for this. I don't want to pay this because the diamond doesn't have talent out there, so let me go low. It's like, yeah, but then you're also setting up your culture to be that we lowball you. That is still a culture. People, how you treat from a candidate, so going to candidate experience to employee experience, they all intertwine to building your culture. Don't fool yourself to think that you can hire, your recruitment process can be all different from your internal company, because your recruitment process is how you hire people from the beginning to the end of onboarding. It's all stemming from your culture.
It's true.
It's interesting to see how many people can connect those dots.
No, it's true. And I mentioned that yesterday as well when I was talking to job seekers. You know, in your job search, the experience that recruiter is creating from the very get-go gives you insight into the experience you're going to have as an employee. What was that experience like? You know?
That's exactly why, for me, when I talk about the employee life cycle, I consider the onboarding stage to start when the person applies. Because that's the first opportunity for the company to really set active expectations and live up to active expectations. So the way you're treated during that stage is onboarding you into the experience, what to expect. Are they going to be responding to me quickly or slowly? Are they going to care about my experience, or are they just going to send me through 7 interviews and expect me to prospect for them for a month for free? You know, it's how are they treating me is all part of how I relate to the company, how I integrate into working with the company.
Even adding on, getting people to do free work as part of your hiring process, submitting work, do this for us, and then it's part of recruitment. I've seen companies, I remember someone had to write, do analysis, and I was like, what? Yeah, it's part of the hiring.
30, 60, 90s, Jen?
Oh my goodness. Don't even get me started on 30, 60, 90.
Someone that was doing the 30, 60, 90, but that was a separate person. There was another person who's a business analyst, and the contract position was a short term, but it can potentially lead into longer. So they were making candidates do a business analysis on their current project. And I'm like, that's free work.
Oh, are you kidding? I had a friend who was asked to do full out prospecting, with no guarantee for compensation if they don't get the job. So the company could still get the business, but if the person didn't get the job, then there's no guarantee. So they would do prospecting for a company and do business development and get nothing out of it potentially. We're just running late. There is one.
We're going over, but this is a topic for Monday about free work in your recruitment process. Going back to summing up our topic about culture add and culture fit, which, by the way, even the recruitment process ties right back to your culture. Now, Jen, if you had to summarize summarize the topic, what would your top 3 tips be when it comes to culture add versus culture fit?
Yeah, I mean, my top 3 tips would be look for people who are different. I mean, it's really that simple. Someone who brings something unique to the table will bring you diversity of thought, and that is going to be great for your organization. Second, when you're looking at those people, you have to first look internally at your existing culture, whether you have an inclusive environment and whether you're ready to bring on a candidate that is unique and that they're going to have a great experience, right? And number three, at the end of the day, it's about how you make people feel, right? Whether you're doing prospecting, whether you're creating employee experiences, everything in life is about experience, and what they leave with it is the way you make them feel. So that's in all areas.
Yeah. Gil, you want to add any ending remarks?
I just want to thank Jen for joining us. It was awesome as expected. For anybody out there who's not following Jen, I highly recommend it. Her content is just absolute gold. She is amazing. So I highly recommend everybody check her out. But seriously, Jen, this was a really great conversation. I appreciate you bringing it to us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. I love doing these.
So do we. Once again, thank you, Jen, for coming on to talk about culture add versus culture fit. Everybody that's listening in, if you have any questions for any of us, feel free to reach out to us directly on LinkedIn. And just to piece of advice when it comes to culture, before you go hire, maybe do an internal look on your culture and ask yourself where improvements need to be added, hence which will lead to culture add hiring versus culture fit. If you're constantly doing a review on your culture, will be a progressive company that can then lead to hiring culture add individuals. And lastly, last advice would be change COVID. If you haven't waken up from COVID, I'm pretty sure you've been really shaken up from COVID. I think all of us have been. You need to hire for future growth. You shouldn't be hiring for culture fit, because culture fit is in the future. Future is culture add. If you constantly keep looking at the progressiveness of your organization and where you want to go and how you want to be seen as a leader in your industry, it all stems down to constantly keep reevaluating your culture. So let's end on that. Culture is really important, and how your employees feel at work every single day is really important, which goes right back to culture. So we're going to end on that note. We'll be back on Monday, and guess since we've already kind of talked about it, it might as well go right deep dive into this topic on Monday. We're going to talk about hiring processes that actually make candidates do some work. This is a topic I do want to talk about. I'm very passionate about this topic, and Gil, you already touched on it.
I can see the fire coming from you already. I'm looking forward to it. This is going to be fun.
I think it's a bad practice to get candidates to do work. But that will be our topic on Monday at 12:30. So hopefully you will join. And if you're a candidate, you should definitely join. Companies should definitely tune in and see what candidates are saying about free work. Because in your eyes, you might be thinking it's right to do, but it's really not right to do. So we'll be back on Monday about hiring practices with free work added as a screening process. So until then, keep safe and enjoy your weekend. It's Thursday, but we won't be seeing you guys till Monday. So enjoy your weekend. Once again, Jen, thank you so much for taking out time. We went a little bit over to talk about this great topic. And anybody that needs to reach out to Jen, please feel free to do that directly on LinkedIn. And Gil and I are always open to anybody reaching out to us as well. Until then, we will see you guys on Monday. Bye.
Bye. Thanks.